I walked toward the ceremony room and realized the chair beside me, the one meant for my dad to take my arm, was still empty. There was no sound of hurried footsteps in the hallway, no last-minute apology, no ringing phone. Only the soft echo of my heels tapping against the floor and the low murmur of guests wondering why the bride was standing alone. I kept my eyes forward and tried not to look at the doorway, because at that moment, I already knew no one was coming for me. The absence felt louder than any scream could have. Somewhere across town, while I stood there breathing through the tightness in my chest, my family was packed shoulder to shoulder inside my sister Paige's townhouse. I could almost picture it even without seeing it. The roar of the Super Bowl on her oversized television, Dad laughing in that booming way he only used when he felt important, Mom floating from one guest to the next with a plate of sliders, Paige showing off the decorations she had stayed up all night arranging. They were nowhere near the place where I was about to say my vows. I took another breath, long and steady, and stepped forward because there was no one else to guide me down the aisle. My phone buzzed lightly inside my bouquet. I glanced down just enough to see the message from my mom. "We are at Paige's. It is no big deal." That was all she wrote. No apology, no explanation, not even a second sentence to soften the blow. "It is no big deal." The words glowed back at me like a quiet dismissal. I remember thinking that the human heart should not be able to break so silently, but somehow mine did, right there on the worn carpet of the community hall in Cedar Ridge, Ohio, in front of people who were waiting with polite smiles that trembled into confusion. I reached Daniel at the end of the aisle. He touched my hands gently, searching my eyes, and though he did not speak, I knew he had figured out the truth before I even looked up. The ceremony moved forward the way ceremonies do, with the pastor reading vows and my voice barely steady enough to repeat the words. When it ended, people clapped. Cameras flashed. Someone handed me a small cup of sparkling cider because the community hall did not allow alcohol. But the moment the noise faded, the emptiness came back. I excused myself, stepped outside into the cold night air, and felt the wind burn my cheeks harder than the tears that tried to come. Before I go any further, let me pause for a moment. I always like knowing what people are doing when they listen to stories like this. It makes the world feel a little closer, a little more human. So if you feel like it later, share it in the comments. When all of this happened, I was sitting alone in my car, still in my wedding dress, watching my breath fog the windshield while the parking lot lights flickered above me like they knew something I did not. I stayed there until the sky turned the kind of pale gray that looks almost silver, just before sunrise. My phone sat face down on the seat beside me. I did not want to see another message, not even from Daniel, who had offered to drive separately so I could have a moment alone. What I needed was silence, and I guess the universe decided to give it to me. Until the clock hit around 5. In the morning, when my phone began to vibrate again, the screen lit up with Dad's name. I stared at it for a few seconds before picking it up. He did not ask about the wedding. He did not ask if I was okay, or where I was, or how the ceremony went. He did not ask about Daniel, or the vows, or whether I made it home safely. His voice was flat, almost impatient, like he had called me in the middle of a busy afternoon instead of dawn after my wedding day. He asked if I had already sent the rent for the month. I remember blinking slowly, as if my eyes had to adjust to the words. The rent. The same rent I had been covering for years under the idea that it was temporary. The rent for the house where my parents lived, because their credit had been damaged years ago, and they needed someone responsible for the paperwork. The rent that had quietly become my responsibility in the same way everything else had. I heard the clatter of dishes in the background, Dad shifting the phone, Mom speaking faintly, as if asking whether I had picked up. It was 5 in the morning, and the question was not about my wedding day. It was about their bills. I did not cry. Not then. Not when Dad repeated the question. Not when Mom's voice floated closer to the receiver. I only listened. And the longer I listened, the stranger the moment felt. I was not being betrayed by accident. I was not being overlooked because someone forgot. I was being treated like an asset and nothing more. My wedding had never mattered to them, because in their world, my value was never tied to love or family. It was tied to what I could pay for. When the call ended, I put the phone down carefully, as if it were something fragile. In that quiet, I felt something shift, something settle into its final shape. People talk about betrayal like it is a sudden punch, a moment that knocks the breath out of you. But the truth is, the worst kind of betrayal is not loud at all. It is a slow erasing of your place in someone's life until you realize there is no line left connecting you to them. I was not just disappointed or hurt. I was no longer their daughter in any meaningful way. I was a convenience, a signature, a credit line. The parking lot was empty by the time the sun finally crept over the edges of the buildings. I sat there for another minute, letting the engine idle, listening to the low hum of the heater pushing lukewarm air against my legs. I thought about the aisle I walked alone, the chair Dad never filled, the way Mom said it was no big deal. I thought about the party at Paige's house, laughter spilling out while I stood under fluorescent lights, trying not to fall apart. And then I thought about the rent, about how the first words from my family after my wedding were a reminder of what they needed from me. I drove home with the morning light spreading across the empty streets, and the farther I went, the clearer everything became. The silence in the car did not feel heavy anymore. It felt familiar, like something I had been carrying for years without knowing its name. By the time I stepped inside our apartment and set my bouquet on the kitchen counter, I could feel the truth settling in. What happened that night was not new. It was only louder. Daniel was sitting at the small table near the window, still wearing the dress shirt from the ceremony. He stood up quickly when he saw me and reached for my hands. I could tell he had rehearsed a dozen versions of what to say, but abandoned all of them the second our eyes met. He simply asked if I wanted coffee, or to sit, or to talk, or to rest. His voice was gentle in a way I needed, but did not know how to accept yet. I sat down and let the warm mug wrap around my fingers before I found any words at all. I think this has been happening my whole life. That was the first thing I said. Not in a dramatic way, not in tears. It came out soft and steady. Daniel did not interrupt. He leaned in slightly, giving me space to keep going if I wanted, or to stop if I needed to. I told him I had been thinking about every time my family reached out to me. When had they ever called just to check on me? When had they listened without asking for something in return? The longer I talked, the more I realized I did not have many memories that fit. There were moments I used to think were normal, that all families were like this, that every daughter eventually became the reliable adult their parents leaned on. But once I looked at them through what happened at the wedding, the shape shifted. The pattern was undeniable. Every missed birthday message, every forgotten dinner, every time they left early or arrived late, or brushed off something important in my life. It all fit into place. My family never saw my feelings as something they needed to tend to. My emotions were treated like background noise, something to be lowered when it got in the way. I remembered one afternoon years ago, after a rough day at work. I had come home to visit for the weekend and told my mom I thought I might quit my job because the pressure was getting to me. She barely looked up from wiping the kitchen counter. She said, "You understand though, right? We all have to do things we do not like." The sentence landed like a hand pressing down on the back of my neck. Not cruel, not comforting, just a reminder that whatever I felt was not something she planned to hold. I told myself at the time that she meant well, that it was her way of saying, life is tough. But sitting in my apartment the morning after my wedding, I realized that what she really meant was, my feelings were inconvenient. It hit me that no big deal was not an isolated comment. It was the theme of my childhood and my adulthood and every stage in between. Every disappointment was supposed to be taken quietly. Every hurt was supposed to be tucked away. Every time I needed something, I should understand why they could not offer it. And the reason never really changed. Their priorities were always somewhere else, usually with Paige. Sometimes with their own stress or their own plans. Almost never with me. I stared at the steam rising from my mug and felt the weight of all the times I swallowed words before they reached my mouth. Like the time I got promoted and called home to share the news. David had put the phone on speaker and said, "Tell her later, the game is on." Or the time I sprained my ankle and needed help getting groceries, but Mom told me. She had lunch with her friend, and asked if I could wait a few days. Back then, I told myself these moments did not matter. I think I learned early that pushing my feelings down was easier than trying to. Make room for them in a place where they were not wanted. Daniel reached across the table and placed his hand on mine. You deserved better yesterday. You deserved better long before that. The words almost broke me, because they felt like they were pressing against something I had kept sealed for too long. I closed my eyes and let the truth land fully. My wedding day was not a betrayal. It was a revelation. What hurt was not that they had missed one important day. It was that they never showed up for any of them. I spent the rest of that morning sitting on the couch, still in pieces of my wedding dress, realizing that I had been trained my entire life to make my pain quiet. Whenever something disappointed me, my mom always used the same line. You understand, though. She said it when Paige messed up, and I had to fix it. She said it when Dad needed a bill covered, and I offered to help. She said it every time I asked for even a small acknowledgement of how something affected me. You understand, though. The sentence worked like a lid pressed over everything I felt. Once I saw that pattern clearly, I could not unsee it. It was in every memory, every conversation, every decision I made to keep the peace. I thought I was being understanding and mature by not asking for too much. But the truth was, I had been taught not to ask at all. I had been taught that my needs were negotiable, while everyone else's were fixed. Daniel sat beside me and let me talk through every piece of it. He did not give advice or try to fix anything. I told him about the time I drove Paige across the state because she forgot to service her car and did not want to risk breaking down. I told him about the afternoon I sat through Dad's lecture about responsibility because I suggested splitting a bill. I told him how Mom always said, "You know we are doing our best," whenever I asked her to be present for something important. When I finally paused, Daniel asked what I wanted to do next. For the first time, I did not have an answer. Not because I was confused, but because my instinct, the one that usually pushed me to fix everything, was gone. I did not want to call them. I did not want to send messages or demand apologies or explain how hurt I was. The truth was that explaining would have meant I believed they could understand, and I knew now they never had. I think the part that settled deepest in me was that no big deal had not just dismissed my wedding. It had dismissed me. It was the same phrase, dressed in different forms, throughout my life. Forgetting my birthday was no big deal. Missing my college graduation because Dad picked up an extra shift was no big deal. Not visiting me when I moved to Cedar Ridge was no big deal. It was a phrase that erased my right to feel anything at all. The more I sat with that truth, the quieter I felt. Not numb, not empty, just clear. There was nothing to argue about. There was nothing to confront or repair. They had been telling me who they were all along, and I finally believed them. It did not come with anger or tears in that moment, just acceptance. And acceptance, I was learning, could be its own kind of power. Later that afternoon, I picked up my phone and scrolled through old messages from Giastity, my mom. The pattern was impossible to miss. Calls came when bills were late, or when Paige needed something, or when Dad did not want to deal with paperwork. Rarely anything else. I opened my voicemail and listened to a message from 2 years earlier. My mom's voice said, "I know this is inconvenient, honey, but can you cover the insurance for now? You understand, though." Hearing it again made my chest tighten. I finally understood what those words had taken from me. By early evening, I realized something important. I was not ready to cut ties impulsively. I was not ready to make sweeping declarations or dramatic choices. What I wanted was to step back far enough to see things clearly without letting emotion cloud it. So I made one decision. I would not reach out to them first. Not for explanations, not for apologies, not even for closure. I would stay quiet and observe. I would let the next move come from them and watch what it revealed. My whole life, I had been the one who bridged the gaps and repaired the silence. This time, I wanted to see what happened when I did nothing at all. As the sun began to set outside our window, the apartment grew warm and still. Daniel sat beside me, his shoulder touching mine, saying nothing. My wedding dress lay folded over the back of a chair, and the bouquet on the counter had begun to wilt. But for the first time, The disorder around me did not feel urgent. It felt honest. When I finally stood up and walked to the bedroom, I felt something settle inside me. Not anger, not resentment, just a quiet awareness of how much I had excused in the name of keeping the peace, and how far that peace had kept me from myself. I knew the days ahead would force me to see things I had ignored for too long. But I also knew I was done trying to make anything look better than it was. I closed the bedroom door behind me and stood there for a moment, feeling the quiet stretch through the apartment like a long exhale. The air was still and warm, and for the first time since the wedding, I did not feel the need to fill the silence with anything. But as I sat on the edge of the bed and let my thoughts settle, something old surfaced. Something I had pushed to the back of my mind for years. It was a memory of the first time I signed something for my family without asking any questions. The moment that had seemed harmless back then, but had quietly laid the foundation for everything that came after. It was sometime in 2019. I remember because I had just moved to Cedar Ridge for my job at the logistics firm and was still trying to figure out how to make my small apartment feel like home. My phone rang one evening while I was unpacking a box of dishes. It was my dad. He rarely called without a reason, but at the time, I still believed his reasons were tied to me, not to something he needed. He told me their lease was expiring and that the landlord was not renewing it because of some issues with the house and because their credit score had dropped. Again, he said it matter-of-factly, like explaining the weather or the outcome of a small game. Then he said they had found another place in the same neighborhood, a modest 3-bedroom with an older porch and a backyard my mom liked. The problem was that the property owner wanted someone with steady income and good credit to sign the lease. Dad said they just needed a little help, just for a few months, just until they got things sorted out. I asked him what had happened to their credit, and he brushed it off. He said things had been tight. He said he had taken a break from working after leaving the auto plant, and that Mom's job at the church paid enough for groceries, but not much more. He said there had been some medical bills and a missed payment somewhere in that. Everything had snowballed in a way they did not expect. But he said it calmly, as if none of it was urgent, as if they just needed someone reliable to help them stabilize for a bit. When he used that word, reliably, something tightened in my chest. At the time, I thought it was pride, that maybe I was finally stepping into the role of a responsible adult he respected. I did not understand yet that my dad only used the word reliable when he meant usable. I thought I was helping. I thought helping was what a good daughter did. I drove back to their neighborhood that weekend. The house they had been living in looked tired, the siding peeling and the windows fogging from the inside. My mom hugged me with a smile that did not reach her eyes and said, "Thank God you came, sweetheart, because this whole situation has been a mess." She barely let me put my purse down before she placed a stack of papers on the dining table. The new lease was already printed, the pages arranged neatly with sticky notes marking where I should sign. I remember sitting at that table with my pen in hand, reading the lines quickly, but not closely. It was a 12-month lease. My name would be the primary signer. Their names would be listed as occupants. The rent was manageable, and at the time I was making enough to help without straining myself. I asked if they would be covering the payments, and Mom said, "Of course, honey. You know we always do our part." Then she gave me a small smile that felt too practiced and added, "You understand, though things have just been stressful." I nodded, even though something inside me hesitated. My dad clapped my shoulder and said, "This is why we trust you. You are reliable." He meant it as a compliment. I took it as one. I signed every page. I drove back to Cedar Ridge that afternoon feeling like I had done something meaningful. I thought they would catch up and eventually take over the payments. I thought signing the lease was temporary. I thought being reliable meant being valued. I did not know that I had just stepped into a pattern I would not recognize for years. The next request came about 3 months later. The electric bill had been late, and there was a notice. Could I cover it just this once? Then the water bill next month. Then the home insurance after that. There was always a reason. Mom would say money was tight because Dad picked up fewer shifts. Adam would say unexpected repairs came up. Sometimes they blamed the bank, or a mail delay, or an error in the billing system. And every time they asked, they used the same tone, the same gentle pressure that made refusal feel like betrayal. You understand, though. That phrase could have been the soundtrack of my 20s. They used it for everything. When Paige's car needed a down payment, you understand, though she is still finding her footing. When Dad needed help with a medical copay, you understand, though health comes first. When Mom wanted to host a birthday dinner but had gone over budget, you understand, though we want it to be special. Each time I agreed. Each time I convinced myself I would not let them down. Each time the reliance grew deeper in ways I could not see. Looking back, I can place the moment the pattern locked into place. It was a summer morning in 2020 when I received a voicemail from Dad. He said he appreciated how much I had been helping. He said I had always been the responsible one, the one he could count on. Then he said he was proud of me. That was the part that got me. I replayed that message more times than I want to admit, thinking, maybe he really saw me. Maybe my efforts mattered. It never crossed my mind that the praise arrived only because he needed something. People often say flattery softens the task. For me, it erased any suspicion I might have had. That fall, another payment slipped. And then another. The landlord called me instead because I was the signer. She asked if everything was all right and if I needed an extension. Her tone was professional, but kind. I covered the rent that month without even telling my parents at first because I did not want them to feel bad. When I finally mentioned it, my mom thanked me quickly and moved on to asking if I could pick up a few groceries for them, things Dad liked, things Paige needed for a small dinner she was planning. I told myself it was fine, that helping family was what mattered. At the time, I did not understand why the requests never felt temporary, why the things they called small favors kept expanding into routines, why every bill eventually found its way to me. Now I see the truth clearly. It was not that they could not manage. It was that I had made it too easy not to. When someone learns they can lean on you without consequence, they stop checking whether you have a limit. There was one moment that stands out more sharply than the rest. I came home one weekend and found a letter addressed to me on their kitchen counter. It was a renewal notice for the lease, my name at the top. My signature is required again. I asked Mom why I had not seen it earlier. She shrugged and said the landlord probably assumed you would sign again. You know how good you are with these things. Dad chimed in that it would be easier if I handled it because he did not want to deal with paperwork. And just like that, the decision became mine by default. I remember sitting at that table again, the same one where I had signed the first lease. The sunlight came through the blinds in long stripes across the papers, and I could hear the sound of a football game on the television in the living room. Dad called out asking if I wanted anything to drink. Mom hummed as she chopped vegetables for dinner. Paige came downstairs briefly to ask if I had a minute to help her with her credit card payment. Later, none of them asked how I was doing or whether I was stretched too thin. They assumed I would sign because it had become my role. That was the moment, though I did not realize it then, that something inside me pulled tight. I did not feel angry or overwhelmed. I felt invisible in a strange but familiar way. My usefulness was valued, yes, but my personality was not. My ability to fix things mattered more than my presence. My reliability mattered more than my emotions. And signing became a reflex, almost like breathing. I did not push back. I took the pen and signed again, because that was what I had been trained to do. It was easier than questioning the dynamic, easier than risking conflict, easier than admitting that the relationship felt one-sided. I wanted to believe that my contribution meant something deeper. I wanted to believe Dad's compliments were rooted in love and not inconvenience. The truth did not bloom until years later, but its seed was planted right then on that quiet afternoon. I can see it clearly now. I was being kept close not out of affection, but out of necessity. I was reliable. I was helpful. I was stable, and those qualities made me valuable in a way that had nothing to do with being a daughter. They needed me, but they did not see me. Taking in my bedroom after the wedding, the memory felt different. The edges were sharper. The pieces aligned in ways I could not deny. I finally understood why it had been so easy for them to miss my wedding. In their minds, my place in the family had never been built on connection or mutual care. It had been built on what I could provide. My presence was optional. My support was not. I reached for my laptop and opened the folder where I kept scanned copies of important documents. The old lease agreement appeared on the screen. Lines of text I had skimmed over years ago stared back at me. My name stood out on every page. Every responsibility, every liability, every commitment was tied to me. I scrolled through all the documents, from the first lease to the utilities I had co-signed, to the insurance policy I had put under my name, because it was easier for everyone. For the first time, I read them with clear eyes. The weight of it all pressed into me slowly, not in a crushing way, but in a clarifying one. These signatures were not acts of love. They were acts of expectation, and I had met those expectations without question. My own needs had been pushed out of the frame so often that I no longer recognized when they were missing. But sitting there, with the documents in front of me, I finally saw the truth written plainly. I had not been reliable. It was convenient. And there is a world of difference between the two. I closed the laptop gently and let the room settle around me. I did not feel regret. I did not feel anger. I felt aware. And awareness, I realized, is the first step toward change. I did not know then how far that change would go or how costly it would be, but I knew this much. I was done signing anything out of habit. I was done being useful at the expense of myself. That thought sat with me in the quiet, steady and unshakable, marking the beginning of a shift I could no longer ignore. I sat in the quiet of my bedroom for a long time after closing the laptop, letting the weight of what I had just realized settle somewhere deep inside me. It felt like turning on a light in a room I had been walking through in the dark for years. Everything that had once seemed harmless, even loving in its own tangled way, now appeared with edges I had never allowed myself to see. And once my eyes adjusted, there was no turning back from the truth. For the first time in my life, I began to look at Paige not as my little sister who needed guidance or second chances, but as someone who had grown up learning that consequences were optional. She had always floated through life on a cushion built from excuses and rescued by everyone around her. Mostly by me. She was the golden daughter in every way that mattered to my parents. Charming, social, good at making an impression before someone saw the cracks under the surface. Dad loved showing her off. Mom bragged about her creativity and said she just needed more time to find her path. I used to believe all of it, because wanting to believe was easier than seeing what was in front of me. While I tucked away my own feelings to keep the peace, Paige spread her wings in every direction without ever needing to land. She threw themed parties, filmed short lifestyle videos, and posted pictures with captions about hustle and ambition, even though she never kept a job for longer than a season. Every time she failed, my parents called it a setback. Every time she overspent, they called it an investment in her future. Every time she ran into trouble, they said she was still growing. Somehow, growing never required her to stand on her own feet. It required me to steady the ground beneath her. The car situation had been the most glaring example, although I did not see it that way at the time. It was late 2020 when Paige announced she was finally ready to take control of her life. That was how she phrased it. She had found a used compact SUV she said was perfect for her new plans. She wanted to start offering event services and said the car would make her look more professional when meeting clients. The only problem was that she did not qualify for the loan because her credit was thin, and the interest rate would have gutted her. So she called me. She called me while I was at work, actually. My phone buzzed during a meeting, and when I stepped out to call her back, she launched into her pitch with the kind of excitement that left no room for hesitation. She told me she had already picked out the car and needed someone to co-sign. She said it would only be temporary until her business took off. She said she promised she would not miss a single payment. She said this meant a lot to her. She said the words in that bright, breathless way that always made people want to help her. I remember asking her why she needed me specifically, and before she could answer, Dad took the phone from her. He said the same thing he always said. You can handle it. He said it as if it were a fact, not a request. He said it as if handling things was my natural role, the one I should be proud to carry. The moment he said that, my stomach tightened the same way it had when he called me reliable during the lease situation. A word that once felt like a compliment had begun to feel like a label pinned on my chest, something others used to reassure themselves they were doing the right thing by, putting more weight on me. I asked him if Paige understood the responsibility. He chuckled lightly and said, "Do not overthink it. She needs a car. You can help." That was the end of the discussion. I hung up the phone feeling a strange mix of pressure and love and confusion. Back then, I thought love meant stepping into whatever space your family needed you to fill. Back then, I had not yet learned the difference between supporting someone and enabling them. I went to the dealership with Paige 2 days later. She bounced on her heels while the saleswoman reviewed the papers. Paige looked genuinely happy, and I let myself be happy for her. When it came time to sign the loan, the pen felt warm in my hand, the air heavy with that familiar sense of obligation. I signed my name on the dotted line. The first payment was due in 30 days. Paige hugged me so tightly I almost believed she understood what I was risking for her. Almost. She made the first 2 payments. The third was late. The fourth came in part. By the 5th, Dad called asking if I could cover it because Paige had unexpected expenses. Mom texted later to say Paige felt embarrassed and asked me not to bring it up because she was trying her best. I told myself it was fine. I told myself she was figuring things out, but something inside me had begun to strain. Meanwhile, Paige continued posting online about her big plans. She shared photos of brunches and events and late-night hangouts with her friends, captions filled with confidence, never once mentioning the loan or the missed payments or the fact that the car she flaunted was tied to my credit. My parents admired everything she did without seeing any of the fallout. Or maybe they did see it and simply assumed I would absorb whatever came. After all, I always had. The memory of those months came flooding back to me in my bedroom. Sharp and bright, I saw myself sending payment after payment while Paige bought decorations and supplies for yet another party she was hosting. I remembered how she thanked me casually, as if the help was expected. I remembered how Mom said Paige was under a lot of pressure and needed support. I remembered how Dad said that was what family was for. But I also remembered the moment I asked Dad why I was always the one to step in. His answer had come so quickly I almost missed the weight of it. Because you can handle it. Hearing that sentence again in my mind made something in me tighten. The way he said it had nothing to do with trust or admiration. It was an assignment, a role, a justification that let everyone else avoid accountability. It was a sentence that turned my reliability into something closer to servitude. Sane on the edge of my bed now, with my wedding still fresh in my mind and the emptiness of my family's absence still echoing through me, I finally understood what that role had cost me. Paige had been protected from every consequence in her life. She did not grow because she never had to. Whenever she stumbled, my parents lifted her before she hit the ground. Whenever she made a mistake, they softened it. Whenever she needed something, they turned to me. And I had let myself believe that helping her was part of loving her. But loving someone does not mean shielding them from reality. It does not mean setting yourself on fire to keep them warm. It does not mean carrying weight that someone else refuses to pick up. Paige had never learned responsibility because I had been taught to take it for her. Thinking back to her Super Bowl party carried a new sting. The laughter that spilled out of that townhouse, the selfies she took with guests, the perfectly arranged snack table her friends praised, the decorations she bragged about. Everything looked polished, fun, successful. But beneath all of it was the same truth that had shaped her entire life. Someone else had paid for her stability. Someone else had taken the hits so she could shine. For the first time, I allowed myself to feel the resentment I had swallowed for years. Not anger, not bitterness, but a tired ache that settled behind my ribs. I had spent so long smoothing over the rough edges of her life that I had worn down my own. She got to be carefree because I carried the consequences. She got to be adored because I stayed unseen. The realization did not make me want to punish her. It made me want distance. It made me want a boundary that could hold its shape, a boundary that protected me instead of excusing her. As I sat there replaying every moment I had stepped in without hesitation, I understood something important. My first boundary would not be loud or dramatic. It would be simple. I would stop stepping in. The decision settled over me like a steady breath. I was not going to announce it to anyone. I was not going to explain or defend it. I was simply going to stop filling the spaces my family expected me to occupy. I would let the gaps appear. I would let the weight shift back where it belonged. I wanted to see what happened when Paige faced a reality that did not bend to fit her needs. That night, I opened my email and searched for the loan statements tied to Paige's car. The balance glowed on the screen, each missed payment marked in red. I scrolled slowly, letting each line sink in. The responsibility was mine, on paper, but Paige had never carried so much as the knowledge of it. She had driven around Cedar Ridge and Dayton with music blasting through the speakers, windows down, hair blowing in the wind, without once considering who kept her on the road. I stared at the overdue notice and felt the first spark of something that had been quiet inside me for too long. It was not revenge. It was not anger. It was clarity. Paige needed to feel the ground under her feet for once. My parents needed to see the weight they had shifted onto me, and I needed to see who I became when I stopped living as a safety net. I closed my laptop gently and sat back, feeling my heartbeat steady. For the first time in a long time, I felt a boundary begin to form in a way that made sense, not out of spite, but out of necessity. I had been reliable for so long, it had become my identity in their eyes. Now I needed to become something else on my own. I woke the next morning with a heaviness in my chest that did not feel like sadness so much as certainty. The kind that settles in after you finally admit something you have been avoiding for years. The boundary I had drawn in my mind the night before was still there, sharp and steady, and I could feel myself standing on a different side of it than I ever had. I was not sure what would happen next, but I knew something had shifted in me. I no longer felt obligated to carry what was not mine. The house was quiet. Daniel had gone out early for a quick grocery run and left a note beside a mug of warm coffee. I sipped it slowly, letting the warmth settle into my hands, and looked around the living room where pieces of my wedding dress still lay draped over a chair. The whole apartment felt suspended, as if everything was waiting for the next breath I took. I did not know that the next breath would come much sooner than I expected. My phone buzzed on the counter. The sound cut through the silence like a small blade. I glanced at the screen. It was early, not even fully light outside. 5 a.m. again. My dad's name glowed back at me, the same time he had called the morning after my wedding. My stomach tightened, but not from fear this time. It was from recognition. I knew exactly why he was calling. I answered on the third ring. His voice came through sharp, irritated, already laced with impatience. He asked why the rent had not been paid yet. He said it was due that day, and he had checked the account, and nothing had been sent. He sounded annoyed, almost offended, as if I had forgotten a chore he assigned me. I held the phone to my ear and let his words run their course. He went on about deadlines and how the landlord might call, and how this was not the time for mistakes. His tone rose slightly with each sentence, the way it always did when he felt something slipping out of his control. For years, it had made me apologize before understanding what I was apologizing for, but not this time. When he paused, I spoke. I did not raise my voice. I did not add emotion. I did not explain anything. I said only 3 words. Ask your golden daughter. The silence that followed hit so fast and so hard it felt almost physical. My dad stopped breathing into the phone. I could hear nothing except the faint static of the call. For a moment, the kind of sound someone makes when they are blindsided. The silence stretched, and with every passing second I realized something. He was not shocked, because he did not understand what I meant. He was shocked because he did. My dad did not answer her. He finally said my name, slowly, like he was testing whether I was serious. He asked what I meant, why I would say something like that, why I was suddenly acting difficult. His tone had changed. It was no longer sharp. It was uncertain, cautious, a tone I had never heard from him directed at me. I repeated the sentence. Ask your golden daughter. I did not elaborate. I did not soften it. I let the weight land exactly where it belonged. My mom must have heard it, because she suddenly came on the line, her voice high and nervous. She asked if something was wrong, if I was upset, if this had to do with the wedding. She said they were sorry if things seemed rushed. She said they had not meant anything by it. She said Paige had planned the party for a long time, and they wanted to support her. She kept talking without taking a breath, trying to crowd out the truth with noise. But beneath her words, I heard something else. Panic. Don't panic. Panic for the rent. Panic for what it meant if I stopped paying. Panic for what would happen if the responsibility they had placed on me for years suddenly shifted back onto them. My dad came back onto the call, voice lower now. He asked me if I understood what missing the payment would mean. He said the landlord would get angry. He said the rent could go up. He said the property might be at risk. He said everything except the one thing that would have mattered. He never asked if I was okay. Not once. His voice trembled slightly when he talked about the risk, and in that tremble, I finally heard the truth I had been unwilling to face. He was not afraid of losing me. He was afraid of losing my support. The realization did not feel like a blow. It felt like a door clicking shut in a quiet hallway. Something small and final. Something that could not be undone. I had spent so many years assuming that beneath everything, there was love guiding their choices. I believed the dismissals and the forgetfulness and the expectations were symptoms of a busy, imperfect family. But hearing my dad's voice shake for the first time, I understood it clearly. His fear was not for me. It was for the money, for the stability I provided, for the life they had built on my shoulders without ever acknowledging the weight I carried. I let the silence fill the space between us again. My dad called my name, but his voice was tight now, thick with frustration and worry. My mom kept asking if I was listening. Paige's voice floated faintly in the background, asking what was going on. The three of them blended together in a restless mix of urgency, like people trying to hold together a structure that was finally cracking. I said I had to go. Then I hung up. My hands were steady as I set the phone down. My heartbeat was steady too. Everything inside me felt aligned in a way I had never experienced before. I walked to the window and watched the sky shift from deep gray to pale blue over Cedar Ridge. And in that growing light, I understood something simple and undeniable. I had finally stepped out of the role they had written for me. I knew then that I had crossed a line, and that there was no going back. Not because I did not love them, but because I finally loved myself enough to stop being used. The moment I said, "Ask your golden daughter," I stepped into a version of myself that had always been waiting beneath the weight of responsibility. A self who no longer bent at the first sign of pressure. A self who could see the truth without flinching. I sat down on the couch and breathed in deeply. The apartment felt different now. Not because it had changed, but because I had. I was no longer reacting out of habit. I was choosing out of clarity. The choice was small, only 3 words, but it had cracked something open in every relationship I had with my family. An hour passed. My phone buzzed repeatedly. I did not pick it up. Daniel came home eventually with a bag of groceries and saw my face. He asked if everything was all right. I told him no. But then I told him I was all right. He set the groceries aside and sat beside me quietly, giving me space to feel the weight of what I had done. I leaned my head back and let the morning pass in waves around us. The truth was settling gently but firmly inside me. I was never meant to carry the burdens they placed on me. I had only been trained to believe I should. And now that I had stepped away, they did not know what to do. That fear I heard in my dad's voice was not about losing connection. It was about losing control, losing convenience, losing the version of me they had relied on for too long. As the sun rose fully over Cedar Ridge, filling our living room with soft gold light, I knew the next days would bring fallout. They would try to call again. They would try to bargain or guilt or remind me of obligations I never agreed to. They would try to pull me back into my old place. But something had shifted permanently. I was not stepping back. The point of no return had arrived quietly, not with a fight, not with a dramatic confrontation, but with a sentence spoken in a calm voice at 5 a.m. Ask your golden daughter. It was a boundary, a truth, a turning point, and it was only the beginning of what needed to change. I woke the next day to a quiet apartment and a phone full of messages I already knew I would not answer. The sunlight was still pale through the blinds, that early, soft kind of gold that usually made the morning feel gentle But nothing feels gentle now. Not after the way my dad's voice had cracked, not after the way my mom had scrambled in the background, her worry rising only after she understood what my silence meant for them. Not after the way Paige had demanded to know what was happening while offering nothing herself. I sat at the kitchen table with a cup of coffee that had gone cold before I even tasted it. The phone buzzed again. Then again. I flipped it face down. I could not look at the notifications because I already knew what was coming. My family had a pattern. When control slipped from their hands, they did not negotiate. They were guilty. They cried. They dredged up decades of sacrifice and framed them as debts owed. They rewrote history until the past served whatever need they had in the present. And by 8 in the morning, the campaign had officially begun. My mom left a message first. Her voice trembled in a way that might have sounded tender if I had not heard it 100 times before. She said she did not sleep. She said my words yesterday had hurt her. She said families go through things, and they do not give up on each other. She said she had done her best raising me, and that this was breaking her heart. She begged me to call back so we could work things out. She said the rent was just a misunderstanding. I deleted the message without playing it a second time. Another voicemail came not long after. My dad. His voice held that familiar tone he used whenever he felt cornered. Firm, but with a current of deep irritation beneath it. He said he did not understand why I was being dramatic. He said I was blowing one simple request out of proportion. He said he and my mom had always been there for me, and that family is everything. He said adults do not abandon their parents over misunderstandings. He said I needed to remember who helped me when I was younger. He said plenty without ever actually saying anything true. I stared at the phone for a long moment before hitting delete again. Then the texts from Paige started. She did not bother softening anything. She asked what my problem was. She said I embarrassed the family by acting unstable. She said the rent was not even that much. She said if I had been upset about the wedding, I could have just talked to them, instead of making drama. Then she blamed Daniel, as if he had planted thoughts in my head, because she could not fathom that my mind could shift without her involvement. One text after another appeared. I ignored them all. Around noon, the tone shifted. The messages got colder. My mom tried to quiet guilt. She said she did not want to lose me. She said she did not understand why I was punishing them. She said she was crying so hard she could barely breathe. She asked if I knew what it felt like to have a daughter turn on her. She asked if this was what I really wanted. She said I was breaking the family apart. I sat on the couch and read her words in silence. None of it surprised me anymore. I had spent so many years worrying about her emotions that I no longer knew how to feel my own. But something about that moment felt steady. Her guilt had always worked on me before. Always. A single sigh from her used to fold me in half. A sad tone in her voice could make me apologize before I even knew what I was apologizing for. Not this time. I typed a reply slowly, letting each letter sit on the screen like a stone placed deliberately in a row. I wrote that I am not paying. Then I hit send. My hands did not shake. My heart did not race. The world did not tilt. It felt like setting a heavy object down after carrying it far too long. Paige texted within minutes. She wrote a string of messages accusing me of being selfish, of overreacting, of ruining things for everyone. Her words were quick and sharp, meant to sting. I stared at the screen, letting each sentence drift by without absorbing it. Then I sent the same reply I had given my mom. I am not paying. She wrote back one final line asking who I thought I was. I did not answer. Daniel came home around early afternoon. He stepped inside quietly, as if sensing the storm before he saw it. I was still sitting on the couch with my knees pulled up, watching the sunlight creep across the carpet. He set his keys down and sat beside me with a soft sigh. "Rough day," he said gently. I nodded. The truth pressed against my ribs, too large to swallow, too sharp to speak all at once. I told him about the voicemails, the texts, the emotional pressure that had come, exactly as I knew it would. I told him how familiar it felt, how many times I had bent under it, how often it had worked. And then I told him how different today felt. He asked what felt different. I looked at him for a long moment before speaking. My voice was calm in a way that surprised even me. I said, "Putting up a boundary comes with a cost, and I am ready to pay for it." He nodded slowly, not in agreement, but in understanding. He took my hand, warm and steady, and let me lean into him. We sat there without speaking for a while, the kind of silence that felt like comfort instead of pressure. I did not have to defend myself. I did not have to explain. I did not have to justify the exhaustion that stretched back years behind me. I could simply exist in the truth of what I had done. Later in the afternoon, my dad called again. I let it ring. Then ring again. Then again. A pattern I recognized from the past, the kind he used when he wanted something and refused to accept no for an answer. I still did not pick up. Then my mom tried. The ringtone echoing through the living room felt soft enough to almost sway me, but I stayed still. I was done folding myself into the shape they preferred. I was done carrying the burden they had decided was mine without ever asking who it crushed. That evening, the guilt campaign reached its peak. My dad left a message saying he was disappointed in me. He said he had raised me better. He said family is everything, and that I was disrespecting the values he tried to teach. He said I needed to grow up and handle responsibilities without making it so dramatic. He did not mention my wedding. He did not mention my feelings. He did not mention love, only duty. I sat with those words for a while. I let them drift through my mind like leaves moving in slow water. Then I felt them lose their power. Every sentence he had spoken relied on an old version of me, a version that believed guilt was the same as love, a version that internalized blame, even when none belonged to me, a version that thought peace meant silence on my part. That version of me was gone. The next day, Paige showed up at my apartment building without warning. I saw her through the window before she buzzed the doorbell, her arms crossed, her face tight with irritation. She buzzed the intercom with the same impatience she had shown all her life when the world did not bend around her fast enough. I stood by the door, listening as she demanded that I let her in. She said we needed to talk. She said I owed the family an explanation. She said I was hurting people who cared about me. She said I could not just refuse to help after everything they had done for me. I did not answer. I let the intercom fall silent. After a few minutes, she left, muttering something I could not make out. I watched her walk back to her car and peel out of the parking lot with the same reckless speed she lived by. When the building grew quiet again, I felt something settle inside me, a kind of strength I had never felt before. For the first time, guilt had washed past me without sticking. The hooks that used to tug at my insides had nothing left to grab. I am not paying. The sentence had become a shield now, firm and simple. That evening, I told Daniel something that had been forming in me all day. I said I could feel the consequences coming, the kind that arrive when people realize their control is slipping. I said my family was not reacting out of love. They were reacting out of fear. Fear of responsibility. Fear of losing the convenience I had always provided. Fear that everything they had built on top of me was about to collapse. He asked how I felt about that. I said calm, and surprised to feel calm, and strangely free. As the night settled over Cedar Ridge and the apartment lights glowed soft around us, I understood that a shift had happened, far deeper than a refusal to pay rent. Guilt had finally stopped working. It had lost its grip. It had stopped shaping me. All that remained now was whatever would come next. I did not know what form it would take. I did not know how loud or messy or quiet the fallout would be. I only knew that I was ready to let it happen. And that was where I stayed as the day ended, waiting. Not with dread, but with clarity for whatever the next morning would bring. The air in the apartment felt lighter in the morning. My body felt tired but steady, as if I had walked a long distance and finally reached solid ground. I sat on the edge of the bed for a moment, breathing in slowly, and I knew with absolute certainty what the next step had to be. The rent was only one piece of the structure my family had built around me. The car loan tied to Paige was the other. That loan had sat in the back of my mind for years, a quiet weight that grew heavier with every missed payment. And now, after everything that had happened, I could finally see it clearly. It was not my responsibility. It never should have been. And continuing to carry it was not helping Paige or me. So that morning, Before the sun had fully risen over Cedar Ridge, I picked up my phone and typed a message to her. The words were simple. I am no longer paying anything on the car loan. You are responsible for the remaining balance. I let myself read it twice, making sure the tone was calm, not angry, not emotional, just true. Then I hit send and set the phone down. I did not have to wait long. My phone buzzed almost immediately with an incoming call from Paige. I let it ring. When she called again, I answered, not because I owed her anything, but because I needed to hear her reaction, to know exactly where her mind was. Her voice came through sharp and irritated, like she had been woken up too early for something she did not think required her attention. She asked what I meant by my message. She said she assumed I was just venting after the fight with our parents. She said the car loan was not a big deal because I had always taken care of things before. Then she laughed, a short, dismissive sound that felt like a flick to my forehead, and asked if I was really trying to make a point. I let her talk until she ran out of breath. Then I spoke clearly. I told her I was done. Not angry, not punishing her. Done. I told her she had had years to take responsibility for her payments and had not. I told her she could no longer rely on me to shield her from consequences. She went silent for a moment, shocked in a way I could practically feel through the phone. Then the disbelief kicked in. She said I was being dramatic. She said I was acting selfish. She said I was letting my marriage change me, and not in a good way. She said she needed the car for her work, for her life, for her image. She said I could not just walk away from it now. I repeated 4 words. I am not paying. She inhaled sharply like she had been slapped. Then she told me I was ruining everything. She said I did not understand how loans worked. She said I was forgetting she was family. Then she hung up. Daniel walked into the living room just then with 2 mugs of coffee. He saw my face and handed me one without saying a word. I took it and sat on the couch, letting the warmth settle into my palms, letting the quiet fill the space where Paige's panic had just been. For a moment, I wondered how I would feel when the consequences arrived. The loan was in my name. My credit would take the hit. I knew that. I understood it. And yet, the cleaner my boundary became, the steadier I felt. I kept expecting fear to step into the room, but it never did. Instead, a strange kind of peace settled in its place. A peace that came not from avoiding consequences, but from choosing them. The next day, everything began to shift. I woke early and checked my email out of habit. At the top of my inbox was a message from the loan company. The subject line was simple: final notice of repossession. My heart beat once hard against my ribs. But then the calm returned. I opened the message and read it slowly. Paige had missed too many payments. The car was officially marked for repossession. The company would be sending someone to collect it within the coming days. I sat back in my chair and let the weight of the moment settle. This was reality. This was the consequence. This was the boundary taking shape. Paige texted 2 hours later. She still did not understand the situation fully, which was painfully on brand for her. But she understood enough to panic. She wrote in all caps asking why her car would not start. She said she tried turning the key and it made a clicking sound. She said she had an event that day and needed to leave. She said I better explain what was going on. I did not respond. Then she called, over and over. I watched the phone light up again and again from where it sat on the kitchen counter. When it finally stopped, I allowed myself to breathe again. That afternoon, the tow truck arrived at the driveway of my parents' house. A neighbor filmed it and posted it to a community group online, and someone sent the video to Paige. She sent it to me seconds later with a long message about humiliation and betrayal, and how people would talk about this for weeks. She told me I had ruined her life. She told me I had ruined her reputation. She told me she could not believe I was doing this to family. But she did not mention the years of missed payments. She did not mention her promises. She did not mention the burden that had been mine alone to carry. I did not send a long explanation. I wrote only this: that was the cost of setting a boundary. And it was worth it. She did not respond. Later that evening, I got a voicemail from my mom. Her voice sounded exhausted and frantic. She said things were getting worse. She said Paige was devastated. She said she did not know what to do. She said the stress was too much. She said she wished I had handled things differently. She said I had always been the one who understood. She said I had always stepped up when things got hard. She asked why I was changing now. I listened to all of it. Then I deleted it. The next morning, I got another message from Paige. It was short. She asked if I would drive her to work because she had no car and the bus route would take too long. She said she had a shift she could not miss. She said no one else could help her. She said it would only be this one time. I set the phone down and let out a long, slow breath. In that moment, I felt something I had never felt in my life. I felt the shift of power. Not dominance, not control, just balance. For the first time, she needed me more than I needed her. And for the first time, I understood that my help had always been optional. It had only felt mandatory because I had never said no. I typed one sentence: "You will need to take the bus." She wrote back immediately. She said she could not. She said she would be late. She said she would lose her job. She said people would see her at the bus stop and she would die of embarrassment. She said I was being cruel. She said I did not understand what this would do to her. I wrote back slowly. This is the reality of responsibility. You will figure it out. She did not respond after that. But later that day, one of her friends posted a blurry photo on social media of Paige standing at a bus stop near downtown Dayton, sunglasses on, arms crossed tightly, shoulders pulled up like she was trying to hide inside her own body. The caption was harmless, something about running late. But the image told a different story. The shine she had always worn like armor was cracked now. The curated version of herself that she displayed online had taken a hit she could not hide behind filters or captions. Paige began to understand, in the cruel but necessary way that life sometimes teaches, what it meant to stand without someone holding her up. And for the first time, she stepped into the world I had lived in for years. A world where you handled what was yours. A world where consequences had weight. A world where being unreliable cost you something. I closed the photo and set my phone aside. My heart felt heavy, but not with regret, with reality, with truth, with the cost that comes with finally stepping out of a role you were never meant to play. That night, I sat beside Daniel on the couch. The room was dim except for the soft glow of the lamp on the end table. I leaned into him and admitted something I had been holding inside all day. I told him this would hurt my credit for years. I told him I knew it would make buying a home harder. I told him I understood I was choosing a harder road for myself. He asked if I regretted it. I thought for a moment before answering. I said no. I said that accepting the hit felt lighter than carrying the weight of someone else's choices. I said I felt more honest with myself than I had in years. I said sometimes the cost of doing the right thing came in ways people could not see from the outside. And I was ready for it. He kissed the top of my head and held me quietly. In that silence, I realized something else. I was not trying to punish Paige. I was not trying to create chaos. I was not trying to make a statement. I was simply letting her live in the world I had lived in for years. A world where you did not get rescued every time you lost your footing. A world where you experienced the sharp edges of your own choices. And in that new space, something inside me finally settled. By the end of the week, Paige stopped calling. The silence was not peace. It was far away. Necessary distance, and with that distance came a strange lightness I had never felt before. I had stepped out of a role that had shaped my life for too long. Paige was beginning to understand the ground beneath her feet, and I was beginning to understand what my life felt like without the constant weight of fixing hers. That was the price of setting a boundary, and it was worth it. What came next, I did not know yet, but I could feel it gathering on the horizon, waiting for me to face it. I did not realize how quickly silence could become a kind of clarity until the days stretched on without a word from Paige. The phone perfectly still on the counter. The apartment felt like it was breathing differently, as if the air itself was adjusting to the space I had finally taken back for myself. But another weight still pressed quietly against the back of my mind, something I had pushed aside while dealing with Paige and the car. The lease. My name every month, the rent was another reminder that I had been carrying them for far too long. Loan. But the other remained, heavier and more tangled than ever. The rent was the foundation of everything. It was the structure my parents stood on. It was also the structure built entirely on top of me. Now that I had stepped back from helping Paige, I could see more clearly what needed to happen next. It was a Wednesday morning when I finally sat at the dining table with my laptop, open in front of me, fingers hovering above the keys. The house was quiet. Daniel had gone to work early. I felt oddly calm. The same kind of calm I used to feel before making a difficult decision at work. A calm that came not from certainty, but necessity. I pulled up the contact information for the landlord, Miss Evelyn Brooks. I remembered meeting her once, during the renewal that had happened, without my parents lifting a finger. She was in her early 60s, sharp-eyed, polite in a distant way, and I always wondered if she knew the truth about the arrangement, if she suspected who really carried the weight of that lease. Her number sat on the screen. I stared at it for a long moment, listening to the thudding of my own heartbeat. This is Evelyn. I straightened my posture, even though she could not see me. I introduced myself, reminded her who I was, and said I needed to discuss the property on Hawthorne Street. There was a pause on the other end, a rustle of papers, and then I swallowed once. My throat suddenly dry. Everything in me wanted to soften what I was about to say, to apologize for needing change, to cushion the truth with unnecessary explanations, the way I had always done for my parents. But this moment was not about their comfort. It was about reclaiming mine. I told her that the arrangement I had with the tenants, my parents, was ending. I told her that, effective immediately, I would no longer be responsible for rent payments or communication about them. Property. I said it clearly, cleanly, without adding emotion. She let out a slow breath through her nose, the kind that sounded thoughtful rather than surprised. She asked if this was a permanent decision. I said yes. She asked if the tenants were aware. I said no. Another pause. Then she asked the only question that mattered. Do you, as the leaseholder, release responsibility for the occupant staying in the home? I answered yes. My voice did not shake. What happened next felt strangely like the world shifting under my feet and settling into a new position. Miss, Book said that since I was the primary leaseholder and my signature was the one binding the agreement, I had the right to terminate my involvement. She said this allowed her to move forward with full legal authority, including eviction if necessary. Her voice was steady, almost supportive, as if she understood what it meant for someone to take back control after a long time of giving it away. She asked me to confirm once more that I understood the implications and that this decision was final. I confirmed. In the silence that followed, something opened inside me. A small door I had kept shut for years. A door that said, I am allowed to step out. I am allowed to stop carrying this. I am allowed to walk away. Ms. Brooks cleared her throat lightly and said she would begin the formal paperwork. She said the occupants would receive notice within the legal time frame and that any further communication would be between her and them. She said I would receive a confirmation letter for my records, and after that, my involvement with the property would be over. Her tone softened at the end. I hope you find this brings you some relief. I did not expect the sentence to land the way it did. It hit with a quiet force, something like gratitude and grief tangled together in a single breath. I thanked her. Then I said goodbye, and the call disconnected with a soft click. The silence afterward felt different than any silence I had ever experienced. It was not heavy. It was wide. It stretched out in front of me like a road I had never been allowed to walk on before. My hands trembled slightly, not from fear, but from the release of something that had lived inside me for far too long. I closed the laptop slowly and rested my palms against the cool surface. The decision was real now. Final. My parents had no idea that the structure they relied on for stability had shifted entirely. For years, they had believed that no matter what they did, I would shoulder whatever weight they handed me. But that belief was built on a version of me that no longer existed. I stood and walked to the window. Outside, a few children were playing in the courtyard, their laughter carrying across the chilly morning air. A mother leaned out from her balcony to call them inside for breakfast. Life continued gently around me while mine felt like it was undergoing quiet reconstruction. There was no satisfaction in the moment. No triumphant rush, just stillness. And beneath that stillness a truth that echoed softly. I did not owe them my stability. I did not owe them my credit. I did not owe them the structure of my life. I owed myself peace, and this was the first real step toward it. The rest of the day unfolded quietly. I did not call my parents. I did not text Paige. I did not explain anything to anyone. I made lunch, cleaned the kitchen, sat on the couch, and let the afternoon light drift across the floor. Daniel came home in the early evening and saw something in my face before I even said a word. He asked gently if I had done what I needed to do. I nodded. He sat beside me and rested his hand on my knee, offering quiet presence rather than questions, which was exactly what I needed. I leaned into his shoulder, feeling the calm expand inside me like warm water. I did not tell him the details yet. I wanted to sit in the moment a little longer before sharing. I wanted to absorb the reality of what I had done without leaning on anyone's reaction to validate it. Later, after dinner, I stepped into the bedroom and opened the drawer where I kept important papers. I removed the file of lease documents, held it for a moment, then placed it on the bed. The papers looked strange to me now, like relics from a life that no longer fit. My name on those pages had once represented obligation. Now, it represents release. I flipped through each sheet slowly. My signature appeared again and again, clean ink lines pressed into paper, with trust I had not realized was misplaced. I traced my finger along the dates, noting how long I had been the invisible backbone of someone else's home. Years of payments. Years of responsibility. Years of stepping in because no one else would, or because no one else was allowed to fail. I reached the last page of the file, then closed it gently, and slid it back into the drawer. My involvement with it was now a memory rather than a duty. As I stood in the quiet of the room, the weight inside me shifted again. It did not vanish. It simply moved, making space for something new, for possibility, for rest, for self-respect. It felt almost like mourning, but not of my parents, not of the house. I was mourning the version of myself who had believed this was the only way to be loved. When I walked back into the living room, Daniel was sitting on the couch with a book in his hands. He looked up and smiled softly. I sat beside him and leaned my head against his shoulder. He wrapped an arm around me and held me like he had been waiting for that moment all day. A soft quiet stretched between us, the kind that feels like safety. I closed my eyes and let it settle over me. The decision I had made earlier that morning carried both cost and freedom. I had chosen a path that would lead to upheaval. I could already feel the gathering in the distance. But beneath all of that was something steady and unwavering, a truth I had never spoken aloud until now, even inside myself. I had the right to walk away. When the night deepened and the apartment slipped into stillness, I finally understood the full extent of what I had done. With a single call, I had shifted the balance of power in my family. Quietly, legally, permanently. And as I reached over to turn off the lamp, a strange sensation washed through me. Not victory, not triumph. Just an open space where burden used to be. A space I was finally ready to fill with something of my own. In the morning, my phone started buzzing before I even made it to the kitchen. At first I ignored it, assuming it was another spam call or an automatic alert. But when it buzzed again, then again, then again, something in me knew. I picked it up and stared at the screen. Dad. I let it ring until it stopped. It started again immediately. I silenced it and set it on the counter. I poured myself a cup of coffee and tried to let the routine calm my breath. But before I could even take a sip, my phone started vibrating again. Mom. I did not answer. I walked to the window instead and watched the early morning light spill over the courtyard. The day looked quiet, but my phone kept buzzing behind me, louder than any alarm. This time the screen filled with missed calls, one after another, like a rhythm I recognized too well. The pattern of panic. By the time I finally picked up the phone, I had 20 unanswered calls. I stood there, holding it, feeling the weight of each attempt to reach me, and for the first time I realized something simple and sharp. They were afraid. Not afraid of losing me, not afraid of hurting me, afraid of losing the safety net I had finally stepped away from. When the next call came, I answered without letting myself think. My mom's voice burst through the line before I could speak, thin and trembling, a strange mix of desperation and indignation. She said something was wrong with the house. She said a letter had been taped to the door early that morning. She said the landlord had been trying to reach them. She said they needed to talk, now. Her words tumbled over each other until she finally paused long enough to take a breath. Then my dad's voice came in the background, sharper, louder, trying to cover the fear beneath it. He asked what I had done. He asked why the landlord was saying the leaseholder had withdrawn. He demanded I explain myself immediately. I listened, quiet and steady, letting the noise pour through the phone like water hitting a closed door. My mom switched back to the line, and her voice cracked as she said something I had never heard in my life. She said she was sorry if they had hurt me. She said she did not want our relationship to end like this. She said they did not realize how serious everything had become. It sounded like an apology, but underneath it was panic. No remorse, not reflection, panic. They had been given a notice to vacate. Not an eviction yet, but the start of the process. They finally understood the structure they relied on was no longer holding them up, and they had no idea how to stand without it. My dad asked again what I had done. His voice shook, even as he tried to steady it. He kept repeating that everything could be fixed if I just talked to the landlord. He said tenants had rights. He said this was a misunderstanding. He said I had always helped before. Then he tried something he had not used since I was a teenager. He softened his tone. He called me kiddo. He asked me to come by the house so we could work it out. He said he would listen this time. But I could hear the truth under every word. He was not sorry. He was scared. I held the phone to my ear and said nothing, not because I wanted to hurt them, but because anything I said would simply invite old patterns back into place. My silence was the first real boundary I had ever set with them. After a long stretch of breathless quiet, my mom whispered my name in a way that used to break me open. This time, it barely dented me. She asked if I was still there. I said yes. She asked what they were supposed to do. I said nothing. Then I ended the call. I stood in the kitchen for a long time afterward, staring at nothing, letting the sound of their voices dissolve slowly into memory. It felt like the first chapter of my life was closing in real time, not with a door slamming shut, with a slow, final click. An hour later, the phone buzzed again. This time, it was not my parents. It was Paige. I exhaled once, long and steady, and answered. Her voice came out tight, breathless, and afraid. She told me she had heard about the notice. She asked if it was real. Then she said something I never expected to hear from her. She said she needed to talk to me, not with that tone she used when she wanted to lecture me, not with that edge she used when she felt superior. Her voice was small, very small. She said she needed help. I leaned against the counter, studying myself. She told me everything at once, her words fast and frantic. She said her job cut her hours because she kept showing up late without a car. She said her friends had stopped driving her because she could not pay them back for gas. She said she had borrowed money from a coworker and could not pay it back yet. She said she did not have enough to help our parents with anything. She said she did not know what to do. She paused, sucking in air like it was running out. Then she said the one thing I never thought would come from her mouth. She said she was overwhelmed. I waited. She did not say she was sorry for how she treated me. She did not say she finally understood anything. She asked only for help. She needed me to step back into the place she believed I belonged. I asked her softly what exactly she wanted. She said she needed me to talk to the landlord. She said I needed to fix the lease situation. She said she needed me to negotiate something, anything, because our parents were falling apart. She said without my help, everything would collapse. And in that moment, I saw something clearly. She had always assumed I existed to stabilize the lives around her. She had always assumed I would handle the fallout. She had always assumed there would be a safety net beneath her, no matter how much. She jumped. I told her quietly that I was not going to fix it. She went silent. Then her breath hitched, and for a second I thought she might cry. But the tears did not come. Instead, she started talking faster. She said she could not lose everything. She said I did not understand what she was going through. She said people were already talking about her taking the bus. She said the church circle was whispering about her parents being in trouble. She said she could not handle this level of shame. Every word was about image. Every fear was about embarrassment. She had lived her entire life protected from reality, insulated from consequences, guarded by parents who had taught her that she never had to carry her own weight. Now the ground beneath her was shifting. I told her she needed to figure things out with Dad and Mom. She asked if I was really going to let this happen. I said yes. She begged me not to hang up. She asked if we could just meet and talk. She said she knew we had our issues, but this was bigger than that. She said she could not stand alone. She said none of them could. And yet, that was the point. I had stood alone for years. They had never seen it, never cared to. They had never wondered how I carried everything. They had only wondered how much more I could carry. My silence stretched. She must have felt it. Then she asked the question she should have asked long ago. What did she ever do to deserve this? I did not say the words running through my mind. I did not tell her that consequence is not punishment. I did not tell her she was finally living in the same reality the rest of us had, always lived in. I did not tell her that people who never face hardship never grow. I simply told her that I had nothing more to give. She inhaled sharply, like the world had tilted beneath her feet. Then she whispered something I could barely hear. She said she had no one else to call. For a brief moment, something inside me softened. But only for a moment. Then I remembered who I used to be in these conversations. The fixer, the buffer, the one who restored balance that should never have been mine to maintain. I did not want that role back. I told her gently that I hoped she figured things out. Then I ended the call. The silence afterward felt impossible to describe. Not peaceful, not triumphant, not satisfying. It felt like staring at a landscape after a storm. The damage was visible. The air was still. The world was rearranging itself quietly. That evening, Daniel came home and looked at me with a question in his eyes. I sat on the couch and told him everything. My parents' panic, their apology coated in fear. The notice, the church whispers, Paige's desperation. He listened without interrupting, his brow furrowed with concern and something like sorrow. After I finished, he asked how I felt. I said empty. Not numb, not hurting, just empty in a way that felt almost clean. He pulled me close, and we sat together in that quiet until the light faded out of the room. I realized then that silence could be a kind of answer, a kind of closure, a kind of boundary. I let the silence stand for days after that last call from Paige. Not an angry silence, not a calculated one, just the kind that comes when you finally stop trying to hold up the sky for others, people. Daniel told me he was proud of me. I nodded, but I did not feel pride yet. What I felt was more like a slow unraveling of the life I had lived for so long, a loosening that was both terrifying and peaceful. The morning the eviction was carried out began so quietly that I almost convinced myself it might not happen at all. I was getting ready for work when my phone lit up with a call from an unknown number. I hesitated, then answered. It was Evelyn Brooks. Her voice was the same calm steadiness she always carried, though I could hear a faint undertone of strain. She told me the sheriff was on site at the Hawthorne Street property. She said my parents had been given time to gather their belongings. She said the rest would be handled according to procedure. I thanked her and hung up. Then I sat on the edge of the bed, my breath held in my chest, listening to the quiet apartment around me. Daniel came out of the bathroom and saw my face. He sat beside me, warm and steady, and took my hand. We did not speak for a while. There was nothing to say. My parents were losing their home, a home they had assumed would always be secured by my signature, my credit, my willingness to absorb the consequences of their choices. But that was no longer the life I lived. A few hours later, while I was at work, my phone vibrated with a text from a neighbor who still lived on that street. She had known me since childhood. She had watched me carry more weight than any child should. And even now, she sent only a brief message, as if trying to protect me from the details. She wrote that the eviction crew had finished. She said my parents had packed hurriedly, and left in 2 separate rides. She said no one came for them. She added a final line that felt heavier than anything else. They looked lost. I read the words without blinking, my eyes tracing every letter, as if trying to understand the meaning beneath them. Lost. I wondered if they realized this moment had been forming for years, not because of one choice or one mistake, but because they had built their lives on the certainty that I would never walk away. Later that day, while I was taking a short break in the office lounge, my phone lit up again. This time it was Paige. I stared at the notification for a long moment before opening it. The message was short and rushed. She asked if I knew where our parents were. She said she had heard what happened and was trying to track them down. She asked if I could help. There was no mention of where she was or how she planned to reach them. She did not have a car anymore. She did not have the money to rent one. She did not have friends willing to chauffeur her around. She was, for the first time in her life, standing without a cushion beneath her. I typed a simple reply. I do not know. She responded with a question mark, then another message asking why I was being cold. I did not reply. She waited 10 minutes, then sent another line. They need us. I need you. She still did not understand. Need had always been her currency. She assumed it carried weight. She assumed it would move me the way it used to. But necessity does not erase truth. And the truth was that the roles we played in our family had come undone, and I was not going to rebuild them for anyone. I put the phone away and returned to my desk. The next day passed without calls, without texts, without messages. Quiet. Almost eerily so. I went through my day as if nothing monumental had shifted in my family tree. But something inside me felt different. The ground felt solid for the first time in years. The air felt clearer. The space in my life that used to be occupied by constant guilt and responsibility now held something else. Possibility. 2 days later, I learned through the same neighbor that my parents were staying in the basement of a distant cousin outside Dayton. They had been offered a couch, not a full room. There was no mention of Paige being involved in that arrangement. She had not picked them up. She had not opened her door. Without her car, she could not have reached them, even if she tried. Standing in my kitchen reading that message, I felt the weight of the reality around me settle fully. For the first time in my life, every member of my family was being touched by consequences that had always been mine to absorb. Dad lost the home he had assumed would always stay under my name. Mom lost the comfort she believed would shield her from accountability. And Paige lost the image she spent years building, reduced now to standing at bus stops with people she used to look through. They had not been destroyed. They had simply been returned to the world the rest of us lived in. That evening, after dinner, I sat at the small dining table with a stack of papers from the loan company, confirming the hit to my credit after the repossession. I skimmed the numbers. I understood the impact, but instead of dread, I felt something almost like pride, a strange, quiet pride. This was mine, my decision, my cost. Not something inherited, not something forced, not something demanded in exchange for love that never came. Daniel sat across from me, watching me closely. He asked if I was okay. I nodded slowly. I told him this was the first time in my life I was paying a price for myself, instead of for everyone else. He leaned back in his chair and smiled softly. He said that was what adulthood was supposed to look like. I laughed at that. A small, low sound that felt like release. Our marriage grew in those quiet days. Stronger, cleaner. Without the shadows of obligations, I never chose pressing into our home. We talked more. We planned more. We looked at our future without the usual list of demands from my family tugging at my sleeve. At work, my mind felt clearer than it had in years. I stopped checking my phone every 5 minutes. I stopped waiting for the next crisis. I stopped bending myself into impossible shapes for people who never tried to bend for me. I was rebuilding. Slowly. Honestly. Brick by brick. A week after the eviction, I received a short voicemail from my dad. His voice was low, tired, as if he had aged years in days. He said they were settling in for now. He said they were doing their best. Then after a long pause, he said he hoped I was well. That was it. No blame, no guilt, no anger. just an exhausted acknowledgement of where things stood. I did not call back. I let the silence answer for me. Paige texted once more a few days later. She wrote that she was trying to find a better job, that people were still talking, that she wished things had turned out differently, that she did not know who she was supposed to be without everything she used to have. I read the message twice. Then I set the phone down and let it rest. I did not reply. She would have to learn the same lesson I had learned over years of carrying, burdens that were never mine. You rebuild from where you stand. No one can carry you through it. One evening, after cleaning up dinner, I walked out to the small balcony outside our apartment. The sun was setting behind the rooftops, spilling gold and orange across the sky. The air was warm with the early touch of summer. I leaned against the railing and felt the light on my face. Daniel stepped outside and wrapped his arms around my waist, resting his chin on my shoulder. He asked if I ever wished things had happened differently. I took my time before answering. I said I wished my family had treated me differently. Yes, I wished they had seen me as a person instead of a safety net. I wished they had recognized love as something you give, not something you demand repayment for. But I did not wish for a different ending. This ending was honest. This ending was earned. This ending was the result of choices made by every person involved. The price of setting a boundary was real, but the price of staying would have been far worse. As the light faded, I closed my eyes and let myself feel the fullness of the moment. Peace, weightlessness, a life reclaimed piece by piece. I walked away with the cost, and I would pay it again. If you have ever been told you were too much or not enough for your own family, remember this: silence can be power, and truth can be the loudest revenge. Tell me in the comments what integrity means to you and where you are listening from.